Hey everyone, it's Adam Farkas. Welcome to another ODwire webinar. Thanks for coming out tonight. And tonight, actually, we have two speakers. And tonight's all about the Optovue Solix by Visionix, which is the first full-range OCT, and also about the VX130 Plus. So we've had several webinars about the Solix already. You've seen it. It's quite a remarkable device. But what we've never had is a talk all about the Solix combined with the VX130 Plus, which is a multimodal screening device. And we have two experts with us here tonight who are going to tell you all about how to use these two devices together in the context of specialty lenses. And I think if you see the names on the screen right now, these folks are no strangers to ODwire and CEwire audiences, so they scarcely need an introduction, but I'll do it anyway. So Dr. Millie Brujic is a partner in Premier Vision Group, which has 4 locations in Northwest Ohio. He practices full scope with an emphasis on ocular disease management of the anterior segment, and specializes in specialty contacts. He's written literally hundreds of articles and done thousands of lectures, and I'm fairly certain that everyone here tonight has listened to him before. And his partner in crime tonight will be Dr. Jeffrey Sonsino, who's also a partner in a high-end specialty contact lens and anterior seg practice in Nashville, Tennessee. He also is a prolific lecturer in contact lens fitter, and I'm certain that you've all seen Jeff here before. He's the past chair of the cornea and contact lens section of the AOA, founder and CMO of Iris, and most recently in 2023, he got the AOA's President's Award for Outstanding Service to the Profession. So this is probably the highest powered tag team we've ever had doing an ODwire webinar, so I'm really thrilled to have them here tonight. So why don't I give Dr. Brujic control here and we can get the festivities underway. So take it away.
Thank you so much. If you ever want to take my wife out for a nice lunch and just share with her the nice words about me that you just shared, that would be absolutely fantastic, and I would cover the cost of it as well too. Adam, thank you. Such a kind and nice introduction. The one thing I would add, and sometimes the things that gets diffused just a little bit when we start talking about the discussion that we're going into, because we're going to go into some deep details on some of this stuff. But at the end of the day, both Jeff and I are clinicians. We see patients on a daily basis, and that's really where we spend most of our time and where our true passion lies. So as we seek out and search technologies that we feel are appropriate for our patients and patient care, and making what we do as best and most precision-based as we possibly can, we look for excellence in everything we do. And that really led us to the Solix, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that this evening. And Jeff, I'm going to hand over the reins to you just so you can give the audience a little bit more perspective on your background, and then let's start getting into some of the information here.
Yeah, Neil, thank you. And again, Adam, thanks for the intro. My wife will be in on that as well, and I'll cover 50% of the costs, as Mile mentioned. My journey in contact lenses has been an interesting one. I started out in academic medicine in Nashville, Tennessee. And after building probably the region's largest complex contact lens practice at this institution, I decided to leave and join my wife in private practice. And I've continued kind of my passion for specialty contact lenses in private practice. And I'm at the point where I only see specialty contact lens patients. So I don't see general patients at all. This is not going to be a talk about glaucoma or the retina, which I've heard of vaguely. This is going to be a talk about contact lenses. And my journey with Visionix is actually a really fascinating one, because independently, like before Visionix purchased Optovue, I had the top of the line Optovue in my practice only to be used for anterior segment. Obviously it had all the retinal and optic nerve stuff on it, but we really only used it for anterior segment evaluation, and specifically scleral lenses. And then independently, I purchased a Visionix, a VX130. And then when Visionix purchased, combined and had both of those devices, I'm like, wow, this is great. I'm a complete Visionix practice. But we also acquired one of the first Solixes in the country. So we've had experience with both of the devices that we're going to talk about tonight. And what I hope to do is just give you my perspective on how to use these devices and really drive them to the peak of their efficiency. And so to me,
Jeff,
it's a lot like a sports car, right? You know, you can take a sports car on the highway and you can, you know, drive it at 60 miles an hour, or you can take it to the track and you can drive it 112 miles around a corner, right? And so that's kind of what we do with our devices and our practices. We redline them and use all of their potential to help us achieve what Mile mentioned, which I think is really important, is excellence in clinical practice.
Jeff, it's funny you say that. So back in 2006, 2007, when we first got the Optovue, which was the predecessor to the what's now Avanti, and which was now the predecessor to the Solix, we actually got it because we thought we were going to use it for 80% glaucoma, 20% macula. And then I remember the sales rep showing me the anterior seg lens, and I said, well, what's this for? And they said, wow, you can measure the cornea. And I said, well, why would I want to do that? They said, well, I don't know. You can see how thick it is. I said, oh, okay. And what I thought was going to be a nothing burger actually became out being 50 to 60% of what I use the OCT for. Actually, macula is about 35% and glaucoma is about 5 to 10% at this point. So what I thought I was going to be using the technology for initially, it's exactly flipped when you really know how to utilize it.
Next slide, please.
Jeff, I think you have the control. There you go.
Great. All right, so today we're just going to take you on a little journey. We're going to tell you exactly how we use the equipment, what we use it for, both the Solix and the VX130. And then we're going to talk about a few cases that are interesting in the anterior segment realm. And then we're going to leave a ton of time for Q&A, because that's really where things like this shine. Is, you know, you've got us for half hour, 45 minutes. Let's use that time wisely, and anything that you guys think of throughout this entire talk, pop it in the message box, and we'll address it. I don't seem to have control here, so if somebody could advance, please. Okay, so you know, the most important thing about these two devices is how we integrate them together to maximize what we do with scleral lenses. And to do this, I'll just tell you kind of how we use them in our practice. Next slide, please. So by now, many of you have heard of the Solix, but just to give you a little overview. Oh, Emil, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, actually, Jeff. So, you know, one of the things we're going to spend most of our time on anterior segment, but certainly realize that this has several other capabilities. And whenever you talk about glaucoma and retinal management, this is at the pinnacle of what you're able to measure and what you're able to do. And this is just a quick example that I wanted to share with you here. This is an individual who came in, they had macular degeneration, and we scan all of these individuals, not only with the B scans, but we also scan them now using the Optovue. And this individual that has a very, very concerning macula. And what we used to be able to do prior to angio was look at this retina and say, okay, there's a questionable region or area right here where there is some fluid, but we're not 100% sure whether or not there's leakage or whether or not there's blood vessels or neovascularization that's occurring. Well, understanding the breadth of knowledge that we can now get from our angio and the slabs of the retina that we're seeing and that we're viewing, we actually have new perspectives on our AMD patients. And what you're actually seeing in this individual, and this was one of the first scans that we actually took with the Solix, was the slab that was corresponding to the choriocapillaris and the slab that's corresponding to the photoreceptor cellular layer, choriocapillaris being the one on the farthest upper right, choriocapillaris, on the farthest upper right, and the photoreceptor cell layer, which is this one right here. We don't expect really to see anything in the choriocapillaris layer, but you can actually see a small little region right here that looks like blood vessels. And when you actually look very closely at the choriocapillaris, they're stemming from this region right here. We don't expect to see blood vessels that are this well defined in the choriocapillaris unless you do see true neovascularization. So this was an immediate referral to our retinal specialist, and we immediately saved this patient's vision. This is one example of posterior segment applications to the Solix. Certainly there are more, but we really want to spend we wanted to highlight one case with the posterior, and we really wanted to spend most of our time now talking about the anterior segment. So Jeff, why don't you start us off with the anterior segment, and let's start running through some of these things.
Great. Next slide, please. All right, so this is how I use the device in my practice. First, the patient comes in, we sit them down, and we take topo and pachymetry. Now, why do we do topo and pachymetry when we're fitting scleral lenses? Well, you know, there's been many studies that have shown you actually can't use topography to fit or to pick a scleral lens trial lens. So why do we use topography with a scleral lens patient? Well, it has to do with the underlying disease. Because when we're fitting scleral lenses, we're also managing the underlying diagnosis. And what's the number one diagnosis that we see in a scleral lens practice? It's keratoconus. So every year when we see that keratocone, we're doing topo and pachymetry to see if there's any changes that would warrant that patient going and us recommending cross-linking. It also helps with the billing and coding aspect. And so a lot of times patients are using vision insurance, and we're billing vision insurance for the entire package of that patient's fit for the year. And when you're doing that, when you're billing vision insurance for medically necessary contact lenses, you kind of build your fee to include all of the ancillary testing. And so the more ancillary testing you're doing at that visit, the more you can justify the fee that you're charging to the vision insurance. And so, for example, if you were literally only just placing a trial lens on an eye and, you know, evaluating that lens without technology, you wouldn't be able to even justify the maximum reimbursable that those vision insurances offer. And so not only are we doing it to evaluate the underlying diagnosis, but we're using it for billing and coding reasons as well. So after we do topography and pachymetry on our patients every year, we then proceed with the scleral lens fit. And when we're fitting scleral lenses in our practice, we don't even use fluorescein evaluation. For my opinion, there is no reason to use fluorescein with scleral lenses, because the amount of information that you get from anterior segment OCT far trumps what you would get from a fluorescein evaluation. And so when we're using or when we're completing our fitting process, what we're doing is we're taking images, and we take multiple images of each eye. We take a central vault image, and then we take an image at each quadrant of where the haptic aligns with the sclera. And so when you do this, when you look in each kind of meridian of how that scleral lens is fitting, you get a complete picture of how that lens is fitting. But we don't stop there. And so after that, we take images with the OCT, the patient moves right next door to the VX130, and then we take a wavefront measurement on top of the scleral lens. Wavefront gives you so much more information than a standard autorefraction on top of a scleral lens. You know, lots of times we're dealing with underlying diagnoses that are complex. You know, for example, you may have a keratocone where the anterior corneal topography doesn't overlap the posterior corneal topography. And so what that will induce is internal astigmatism. And that internal astigmatism can manifest in higher order aberrations. So you want to know that before you walk back to your exam lane and try to do an over refraction with your phoropter, you want to know what your vision potential is going to be. And if the patient has significant higher order aberrations while they're wearing a trial scleral lens, you know what to expect, and you know what visual acuity that you are going to get or what you're not going to get. And so that's kind of the process in our practice where, we start out with the VX130, looking at the underlying diagnosis. We then go right to the Solix to do the evaluation of the trial lens. And then we go right to the VX130 again to get the wavefront on top. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the kind of information that you get from the topographical map on the VX130. And this is, it's a wonderful topographer. And I'll just tell you a little anecdote about when our Placido-based topographer finally kicked the bucket. It was an old device, but it was a workhorse. We had to get a topographer in there quick. I can't go a day without a topographer in my practice. And so I made some calls, and within literally 2 days, I had 3 of the top topographers sitting on my pre-testing desk, and I had our technicians, and bless their heart, they were ready to strangle me at the end of this week, but I had them run every single patient on every single one of those devices, all 3 of those devices, and hands down, my techs picked the VX130. And if you've not seen one in action, go up to Optovue during one of the shows. They always have one at the booth. It's just a sexy device, right? You basically just you press one button, it auto centers, it follows the eye movement, and it's just, patients love it because it's highly technological. But here's an example of the kind of information you get. And if you look at this image, it's a really kind of odd image. If I have cursor control, hopefully you guys can see this. So you're looking at an eye, and you see these little white dots all throughout the cornea behind the overlaid topographical image. And at first you think, well, that just must be artifact, right? But in fact, this is the case of a patient who at 20 years of age was working in a chemistry lab as a graduate student, and he was grinding something with a mortar and pestle in a ceramic pestle, and the chemicals exploded and shot thousands of shards of the porcelain crucible into his cornea. And the surgeon was able to remove a lot of them, but he's left with tons of these shards. And it created a very irregular corneal shape and a very irregular scleral shape. And so when you have that kind of irregularity, you want to have the confidence that your topographer is going to get that measurement and get it right. And so here's an example of kind of one of the worst corneas that you can get, and the fact that you get a really good result. It's working. Okay, so that's the VX130 and the topography aspect of it. But when it comes to evaluating scleral lenses, this is where the rubber hits the road. I mean, this is the juice when it comes to getting stuff right and getting it done well. And the reason I threw this image in here is because this just shows you exactly the reason why we use OCT, and the fact that you really can't get the same information with a fluorescein evaluation. If you look at this carefully, what we're looking at is the haptic as it lands on an eye. And this is the front surface of the lens here. Here we have the back surface of the lens. And as you follow this through, and the edge of the cornea is somewhere around right here, okay? And as you follow it through, you see as the haptic comes down, it aligns with what looks to be, the front layer of the conjunctiva. But in fact, what we're looking at is fluid-filled sacs here, okay? And the conjunctiva and the sclera itself really is this area. So if we were to look at this with fluorescein, this would look like the haptic was perfectly aligned. But as we're staring at this right now, you can tell that the haptic is grossly misaligned here. You can see this angle compared with the shape of the sclera, they're not even coming close. What this is doing is it's basically creating, this haptic misalignment is creating a bunch of fluid under the conjunctiva to kind of match the misaligned haptic, okay? So again, when we talk about the excellence of fitting scleral lenses, which really everyone should be striving for, you just can't get this kind of information without using OCT. Here is what it looks like in the practice. And so this is just an example of somebody using it. You know, we save significant time when we're using a device that's not only, you know, one function. So when we have a device that has topography, pachymetry, wavefront aberrometry, autorefraction, anterior segment biometry, this has an air puff, right? Which, gosh, I can't tell you how much time this saves in the regular exams that we do in our practice that my colleagues, my associates are using. It just speeds up everything. In fact, there's 26 diagnostics within 90 seconds. And that's another really important thing because, you know, you can have a multifunctional device, but if it takes too long to get that information, you're just wasting time. So the time management aspect of this is wonderful. It provides for efficient data collection because you have it all on one screen, and it's a small footprint. I mean, you can see we actually at one point had a second device on this little table. Neil.
All right, so Jeff, you I'll tell you that you practice at a level in terms of specialty lenses that very few do in the country, and it's always great to hear some of the little nuggets and pearls that you share. I think just like everything, you sometimes wonder what some of the functionality on some of these technologies will do. And until you actually have it in your practice and in your office, you really don't understand it. And then you start thinking and asking yourselves, well, how can we care for the patients that we see in our offices better? And I want to kind of take a non-scleral lens wearer here. This was kind of an interesting history and one of the first cases that we had on our Solix. So this was a 31-year-old female. She came in and she was in tears. She had already taken her contact lens off of her eye. 31-year-old professional female. She said she was at work an hour ago. She heard a pop and her vision immediately went cloudy after she heard the pop. And what you're looking at here is a slit lamp evaluation of the individual's eye. On the left-hand side, you're just simply looking at the eye at the slit lamp with a low magnification. And on the right-hand side, you're looking at that same patient. You're only looking at it with a high magnification. And what's evident is the lack of any type of clarity to the iris structure. And much of that is because of the corneal edema that you can see a little bit better on the high mag view on the right-hand side. Now, this individual was wearing a high minus, high cylinder silicone hydrogel lens on the eye that was affected, and it was just her left eye. So this is still relatively an unclear picture here. What I'm showing you in this image is just a picture from the previous video, but you can see this region right here that looked very, very peculiar at the slit lamp. I put a drop of Pericane in the eye because she was uncomfortable, and I asked my assistant to go get some scans on the Solix. And I was specifically interested in what this little region or area looked like because I didn't see any positive corneal staining on the ocular surface. And when she took the scan, you can actually see the region on the corneal cross section that corresponded to this small little area. And it was actually a small, tiny little area of an epithelial detachment. What you can also see is in this cross section, there is a massive amount of edema. We don't know how much edema we have in this cross section. We just know there is. And the first indication of it is the irregularity that exists on the endothelial surface of the cornea. So the beauty in this is when we start looking at some of the other scans. So I asked them to take a full corneal map, which is what this is. This is essentially a pachymetry of the total cornea. And you can see that this cornea is very swollen. For those of you that aren't used to looking at corneal pachymetry maps or corneal thickness maps, we typically expect to see something between 5 to 560, 570 microns. And centrally in this individual, she's measuring 827 microns. So we have substantial thickening in this cornea. So we have a lot of corneal edema.
Hey, Mail, can I ask, did this patient have keratoconus?
No, this patient was a regular patient. She had a high level of cylinder, but it's regular cylinder, correctable to 20/20. And she only wears contacts a few days a week, Jeff.
I mean, if you go back to that last picture, it almost looks like a hydrops in a keratocone.
Yeah. Jeff, that's interesting. So, you know, that's an interesting point, Jeff. The weird part about it is that it happened so suddenly, though. Again, it was just such a bizarre presentation. So I ended up treating her with corticosteroids, and I saw her at 4:15. So by the time she left our office, it was about 5 o'clock. And I RX'd corticosteroids every 30 minutes for the first hour, and then every hour until she went to bed that night. And then the next day, I wanted her to start 4 times a day. And I called her the first thing the next morning. Now, here was part of the challenge the next morning. Most of the time, I'm a partner of a 4-location practice in Northwest Ohio. And most of the time, we have coverage at every single one of our locations at any given time. This one day was the exception of the rule because all of us were going to our state conference. So because of that, we didn't have anybody that the patient could see in the practice. So I had the patient, she told me over the phone that she was feeling better and her vision was a lot better. I said, well, go into the office and I'm gonna have my technician take some measurements on your eyes and we're gonna compare them. Because I was actually seeing patients in my Lima location that day. So nobody in our Bowling Green office that day. And what you can see on the right-hand side, you're actually seeing an anterior segment picture from the Solix. And although you don't have the same view that you do from the slit lamp, you can actually see that there's a substantial difference in the clarity or the view of the iris on the right-hand side 18 hours later compared to that initial presentation. When you look at the initial full range anterior scan, and what this does is it gives you a 16-millimeter scan across the horizontal plane of the cornea, the iris, and also the sclera leading up to the cornea. This was the initial scan, and you can see the irregularities that exist here in the cornea, representative of corneal edema. And you can see what that same cornea looks like 18 hours later. When you look at the initial thickness, you can see what it looks like, and you can see what it looks like 18 hours later. So again, it's a very, very interesting and peculiar case, but it actually gave me the ability to look at this individual the day one, treat her with what I thought was a logical treatment approach. It didn't seem infectious in nature. There wasn't any purulent discharge. And because of the sudden onset, again, I had to assume it was some type of peculiar injury that had happened or occurred. And less than 24 hours later, you're seeing all of these well-defined images and also an anterior segment view on this individual that shows normalcy. Well, 2 days later, when I came back, I met her in the office on Saturday to get eyes on it, just to assure that everything was good and clear. And we literally tapered her off the corticosteroids at that point. This gives us some of the power that we're seeing behind this technology. It actually makes us not only better diagnosticians, but it also helps us follow the conditions that we're treating much more precision-based. There are other applications that we've already started adding into our scleral lenses. This, for any of you who utilize corneal pachymetry scans, you know that this is consistent with a keratoconic patient, and you can see on the left eye the area of corneal thinning, which is truly what keratoconus is. We typically describe it as a corneal steepening condition, when in actuality it's a corneal thinning condition that manifests as corneal steepening. Again, that's the symptom and the end stage sign that we're seeing. But ultimately, it's a corneal thinning condition that will eventually lead to corneal steepening. And this is one of the ways that we monitor this. So Jeff, you talked about the VX130. This is a second way that this condition's monitored in addition to topography. And this is so critically important. Jeff, you were talking about vision plans and categorizing the level of keratoconus. This one measurement is so critical to help identify and put into the appropriate category the level of keratoconus that you're actually treating. But one of the things that we started doing is for any new keratoconic patients that are coming into the practice, we're actually taking images on the Solix in addition to pachymetry scans on these individuals. So this patient with the level of scarring right here already sets an immediate precedent for me before I even walk into the exam room, regardless of what the predecessor's notes from the ophthalmologist or optometrist came in saying. Because with this clinical picture, I know immediately that there is going to be a massive limitation in best corrected visual acuity because of where the corneal scarring's actually present. This was an interesting one. It was a patient that called in earlier that day and they said, I feel like there's a smudge on my scleral lens. And this is again the image from the Solix OCT. So again, this is now, when you talk, Jeff, about duplicative or things that can happen in one piece of instrument or one piece of equipment, but you can do multiple things on it, has multifunctionality. This is a perfect example. So I wanted to know what the scans were, Jeff, just like you described with the OCT cross section centrally and also in the 4 principal meridians of the landing zone. But we now take pictures of these individuals so we can get an initial quality assessment of what that scleral lens surface looks like. Now, to put things into perspective for you, and I'm going to point this out here, and initially when I point this out, you can see the big white reflex that's located centrally, but when you look closer, you'll actually see some irregularities to the surface around the edges of the light reflex. And just to give you perspective so that you can compare it to what it might look like in an individual who doesn't have any type of dry areas or areas of non-wetting, you can see this individual wearing a scleral lens. And again, you can see that there's none of this, what I'm going to refer to as irregularity or haziness outside of this region right here. When you look at this patient right here, there's none of that. And when you look at this individual, you see that haziness. So exactly what the patient's describing is consistent with what we're seeing. And when you look at the actual image that's taken in cross-section on this patient, again, this is the vertical scan, and this is the lens. This is the post-lens tear reservoir right behind it, and this is the cornea. When you take a close look, you can actually see the drying on the surface of this lens. And what I'm going to do here is simply magnify it. And when you magnify it, you can see the level of drying that's occurring on the surface of this lens. Certainly, we want to, at our slit lamps, look at this patient and make sure we're looking at it with our slit lamps to make sure this is in fact happening on the surface of the lens. But this is creating the precedent and making me much more hyper-focused when I walk into the exam room so that I already know and have a lot of information on these patients. Now, Jeff, I'm going to call you in on this one here a little bit because I know that one of the things that you said in 2023 was, I think you called 2023 the year of limbal clearance, if I remember correctly.
You're right.
And this is an example of an individual. I'm sorry, Jeff?
I was just going to say, I know what you're going to say on that top one, and you're not
this was, yeah, well, you're not getting it. You are correct. And this limbus is actually jaded by a peripheral corneal degeneration that's much greater in the temporal region than it is in the nasal region, although it's not without its challenges in the nasal region here as well too. So this is the diagnostic lens that was placed on the eye. So we know that we need to lift this region of the lens, but also without truly affecting the way that it's fitting over here. So the brilliance in this is we actually have it in cross section. We don't have to, Jeff, like you said earlier, depend on fluorescein to actually take these measurements. We now see exactly what's happening, and we can get very precision based with the labs that we utilize. So I'm going to take you back to the previous picture, and you'll see that with the diagnostic lens, it's lying right up against this corneal peripheral irregularity. But then with appropriate instruction to the laboratory, you can actually see that we have a nice landing zone here. We've actually cleared this region right here. We actually have a second peripheral corneal zone on the lens here. And then we have this third curve right here that exists where we can really truly get customized around these regions of irregularity. And what I'm going to point out in this next slide is just simply the sophistication in the designs of the scleral lenses that we have. And Jeff, I'll share with you that, even though I'm not a sports car guy, I can appreciate what you're saying. And the lenses today that we're using are so sophisticated that if we're not utilizing technologies like this to help us fit them better, we're not fully utilizing the potential in these lenses. I'm going to go over one more case here. This is an individual who came into me for a first-time lens assessment, and you can see centrally it's a vertical scan, and this is pre-Solix, and you can see it's a 6mm scan here, but you can see that the lens is abutting right up against the anterior surface of the cornea. And when we refit this individual, you can actually see the irregularities that exist in the anterior surface of the cornea that are still residual from when that predecessor lens was actually compressing up against the anterior surface of the cornea. And oftentimes these individuals will have to be sitting in this lens anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks before we ultimately can get a good final refraction on these patients, because it just takes time for that cornea to actually fall into its natural resting state again underneath a lens that's not compressing against its anterior surface. So Jeff, I wanted you to kind of take it back here and just give everybody a summary on everything that we talked about here. And then I'd love to open up the discussion to questions, Adam, that may have come in through the webinar.
Yeah, so I mean, look, Neil, we speak the same language when we're talking about scleral lenses. And what it comes down to is precision fitting, right? There have been multiple papers out there that show that the amount of vault that we are supposed to go for in the central corneal zone is 200 microns. And even from some of the labs, if you talk to the consultants, they're like, yeah, anywhere from 200 to 400 microns. But when you're using technology like this, you can get it exactly right, right? And the reason to get it exactly right is, my friend Lanji Michaud published a paper that showed that if you go just from 200 microns to 300 microns of vault, you give up 30% of the oxygen reaching the cornea. And so the cost of not getting it right with the precision of your fitting can be great. And so, the goal is to use the best technology out there to fit your patients, and that's how you get it right. Neil, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, a few things. One, when you have these technologies, I think we really need to consider putting appropriate processes in place in your practice. What you don't want to do with technologies is you don't want them to be a nuisance. You really want to harness the power of them. So I would consider, if you have a Solix or advanced technologies in your practice to measure OCT, or excuse me, to measure scleral fits, make sure you have that process in place. So every time the patient comes in, it's repeated. That does two things. One, it gives the patient confidence that every single time they're coming in, things are being done the same way. So there's some level of consistency to it, and you can actually follow it and monitor over time. But the second thing is the technicians that are utilizing the technology become experts at those types of scans that you really are wanting to look at and harness the power of for the benefit of the actual scleral lens fits. So again, I think it's so critical to just make sure you're thinking about the process and how this is all going to look in your practice. I'll share with the audience one other thing that I started several years ago. I look at my schedule in the morning and I'll go over with my technician exactly what I want done with the patient prior to me seeing them. So let's use the scleral lens wearer. If somebody's coming in for a scleral lens follow-up and they're wearing the lenses, they know to do the appropriate OCT scans. We go over what those are, and we do the over refraction over the lenses. So they know every single time that patient comes in, they're doing the exact same thing. If we have a new specialty lens case, they know exactly what to do with the OCT and what measurements I want, so that they do it prior to me entering the exam room. So I don't have to engage with the patient and then disengage and then re-engage after those measurements. It just becomes much more of an efficient process. All right, Adam, with that said, God, Jeff and I could talk about this for hours, but I think now's the appropriate time to open up the floor to discussions, see if there were any questions that came through and see if we can answer some of those questions.
Okay, well, thank you guys. That was really great and really great cases, and thank you for bringing those up to us. It's always fun to have some illustrations of real cases during a talk like this. So, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into the question box, and we will go ahead and ask them. So, question number one, and again, this is a little bit, I think, past what you guys were talking about, but I guess people are curious. The process for you guys, you discussed all of the diagnostic instrumentation. Question here is, how do you actually get the lenses made? I know, Millie, you mentioned the lab a couple times. What's your relationship like with the lab, and how does that actually work to get designs to them? I know that we have, in our audience tonight, there's a variety of people, right? You have generalists, you have specialists, and some people who may be new to sclerals as well.
So Jeff, why don't you take that first, because you are probably what I would consider at the pinnacle of really leveraging the people around you to do this, and then I'll share with them what my process looks like.
All right, so the process of actually getting the lenses made, it's kind of a broad question, but I'll tackle it like this. If you're doing scleral lenses, you're going to want to have at least 2 labs, and you're going to want to use 2 different designs that are totally different than each other. And there are enough, designs out there where you can find this. And basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to tailor the patient's condition or their presentation to the designs that you have at your fingertips, okay? And so when I'm having lenses made, my standard talk with the patient is, I guess it's a little bit odd, but it tends to work. And I tell them, hey, there's 2 ways that we can do this, right? We can either do this with the standard way of making a scleral lens, where we do some trial and error. It will take us 4 to 6 visits to get this just the way we want it. And I can typically get this covered by your vision insurance. The second way that we do this is we take an impression of the eye, and we are able to make a lens that is perfectly tailored to the shape of your eye. This one is not covered by any vision insurance nor medical insurance, and it's a little bit more expensive. But you tell me what's most important, because the second way that we can do this, we get a perfect fit right out of the chute. So you let me know which way you want to go. And that would apply not only to impression-based technology, but that would also apply if you're using scleral topography as well. And so, we have patients that do 50-50, right? Some of the patients that drive in from a while away don't want to do a trial and error fit. And for those patients, we're doing impression-based technology. For somebody who cares more about the cost of this than the time it takes, they're going to choose trial and error. Neil, how do you tackle it?
Yeah, so similarly, Jeff, I'm actually going to go into some of the specifics on the actual ordering process, because once we've now kind of put the diagnostic lens or the actual lens on the eye for that matter, then what we do is we communicate with the laboratory, and we'll call them and literally tell them exactly what we're seeing. And it's a 3-step process. What does the clearance look like at the minimum point where it's clearing the cornea? What does it look like in the limbal region? And what does it look like in the landing zone? And we literally are precision based on the metrics that we're actually receiving from the anterior segment OCT in order to give that lab the exact feedback that they need to ultimately create a lens that's precision based for that patient. So that's really the process in terms of how the fitting goes, and then also to how the communication with the laboratory goes as well.
Right. And I think you guys are kind of in a unique situation. Certainly, not to divulge your ages or anything, right? But you guys are sort of you come from an era where where there was a before and there was an after, right? A lot of this high tech stuff has only really cropped up in the last maybe 20 years, or maybe even less than that. So you started out your careers in an environment where you didn't have a lot of the stuff at your disposal. And I guess one question that comes up is always, how much more accurate has this made your fitting for sclerals?
So Jeff, I have to take this one because I actually did a study on this and presented the poster at Global Specialty Lens Symposium.
I love this study, by the way. I've heard you talk about this, and it is a perfect study.
So I actually compared myself, Adam. So we used to look at our central corneal clearance estimates at the slit lamp. So I said, all right, I'm doing more of these, and I feel like I'm pretty confident in my abilities. So I looked at the lens at the slit lamp, and I estimated what I thought the central corneal clearance was in micrometers. And then we literally, right after that, we just had patients go to the OCT. And I forget, I think I did 5 or 10 patients. And I didn't look at the results until all the patients were done because I didn't want to teach myself how to do it better or worse. I just wanted to do it. And I was all over the board, Adam, in terms of what I was estimating at the slit lamp and what the OCT was actually measuring. And not only was I all over the board, I thought I was going to be consistently over or consistently underestimating. I was over 200, sometimes under 200 microns sometimes. And at that point, I realized that I can't give the garbage in equals garbage out. And what I was giving the laboratories prior to that, although I thought it was good, it was garbage because I wasn't even giving them accurate estimates on what that central corneal clearance was. So I immediately stopped even estimating it at the slit lamp, and I immediately started depending 100% on the technologies that we're doing. Because again, for me to estimate at the slit lamp is just a waste of time because I'm, to be very blunt with you, horrible at it.
How about you, Jeff?
How has technology improved? I mean, look, my practice has always thrived on technology. You know, when something new and better comes out, we're going to jump on that, and patients appreciate it. You know, like when patients are worked up in my practice, they're worked up with the top technology in the industry, bar none. It's hard for me to answer that, Adam, because I haven't existed without the top in technology. You know,
Right.
The technology keeps getting better, which is great. But to me, it's the only way to practice.
Right. Yeah, you're not old enough, for better or worse. Because we just got another question in from one of the old timers. This is an interesting one. Do you ever modify the lenses in the office, or when you need a modification, do you just immediately go back to the lab and say, shoot me a new lens?
So it's funny. I started my career modifying lenses in office, right? And that was corneal GPs, and it was relatively easy to do. But when we're talking about scleral lenses, we're talking about like 3D lathed devices, right? Which cannot be modified in office. And to kind of delve into that, the reason why just a little bit further, 95% of scleral lenses should be made with a toric haptic, okay? And that mirrors the population. There's only about 5% of the population that has a spherical shape to their sclera. So only 5% of scleral lenses should be made spherically with spherical haptics. And the only thing you would be able to modify in office is a spherical haptic lens. And if you're not familiar with what that term means, it's basically if you take that scleral lens and you sit it on a tabletop, the edge of that lens is going to rock almost like a saddle would rock if you placed a saddle on a flat floor, right? And so you really can't modify these lenses in office, as we did very successfully with corneal GPs.
Right.
To add one more thing to that, if you modify an office, the one caveat with that with scleral lenses is when you need to reorder, you don't really know exactly what to reorder if there wasn't an office modification. So it makes it difficult to replicate the lens at that point.
Right. Interesting observation there. I don't know if this is a question, but in your case of the 31-year-old with the edema, Millie, it sounds like you did a little bit of telemedicine, where you actually couldn't be present in the clinic that day, but you were able to get the results immediately. And so this is more of an observation, I guess, than a question. But I have a question then. So how much have you guys been able to use these devices sort of off-site when you haven't been present to pull the data that you've needed?
Yeah, so Adam, I'll take that one. So we were in a situation where I had to work with the situation that I was dealt. And in that, the good news is that the images can be transferred relatively easily. Whenever you save these images, you can email them without any patient information on them. So my technician immediately shot me over the email. The door knocked. I walked out of the exam room with the patient that I was with. I literally looked at the images and I picked up the phone and talked to the patient in my Bowling Green office. In my mind, this isn't an ideal situation. All of this technology is really meant to supplement what we're doing, but at the end of the day, it's meant to make me make better decisions. It's very, very difficult though, Adam, to do that without actually, especially when it comes to specialty care, it's very, very difficult to do that without actually seeing the patient at the slit lamp and touching the eye, et cetera, and hearing exactly what they're telling you. It's very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment about that as well. I mean, look, you know, there's standard of care stuff, right? And then there's also exceeding standard of care. And if you want to practice below standard of care, you could do that now with like telemedicine and things like that. But you really can't, at this point, you can't meet standard of care doing an exam virtually. And so, you know, there are going to be some companies that want to do that want to practice substandard care. And there's going to be, you know, some practitioners that are willing to compromise and practice that kind of care. But if you're going to practice super standard care, meaning above standard of care, which I think is where Mile and I try to hit our sweet spot, there's just no way that you can do this stuff remotely.
Right. And I think if I can editorialize a little bit, at least on the medical side, I think what we're seeing now is hybrid models are becoming much more common, where the things that you can do remotely, you know, patients are starting to expect it because of the pandemic, but there's obviously a line that gets drawn a lot of the time, right? So you know those things that you could potentially do, you know, from a distance versus those that you can't. And I think all specialties have been struggling with that and evolving, at least certainly since 2019.
Hey, if you're a psychiatrist, you can practice, you know, your craft perfectly from a computer, right? But if you're an optometrist, you simply cannot practice at the standard of care without being in front of that patient. Right. And there's no accepting that right now. I mean, there's no exceptions to that.
Right.
Maybe one day we will be able to, but certainly not now.
Yep. So interesting question here. So again, it sounds like this is a question about staffing and how this actually works. So it sounds to me like for both of you guys, you don't usually do the scans yourself, right? You have staff do it?
That's correct.
Excellent. So basically the staff comes in and gets trained. And you mentioned consistency. So Millie, you said that you actually do it on all of your patients who come through?
All of our specialty scleral lens wearers. So they all get the exact same scans every single time they come in. And right now we're actually adding some of those scans, Adam. Like for example, the external photo, I'm doing that right now because we're actually starting to look at what blanching may or may not be present so that I can see what's going on even before I walk into the exam room.
Right. And of course, having the staff do it every single time, they probably get better at it. Right now, I assume that when they first started, people came out to help train them, probably physically and both and online. But the staff themselves, I guess you functionally cross-train the people in the office so everybody's pretty up on how to actually use the devices?
So there are people that are in our office. We have individuals that are more devoted to the technical side of things and direct patient care, meaning the pre-testing, the special testing, the OCTs, the specialty lenses, and then there are people that are spend more of their time on the front end, the optical and the front desk. So the individuals that are working directly with patients, most of them are cross-trained to be able to do that functionality. But I'll tell you, Adam, it was remarkable how quickly they actually picked this up. The scans they're not difficult to actually perform. They look gorgeous when you take them, and this evening when we're showing them, they look beautiful, but they are very, very easy to take once you know how to do it. So the good news is it doesn't take very long to train individuals how to actually take the scans. Interpretation of the scans is really where the time kind of starts to meld itself, because you really have to understand what you're seeing and what you're looking at and what you want to be looking at and what you want those desired fits to look like.
And Adam, what you're going towards right now, I think, is just a hugely important thing. There's not one technician in our practice that doesn't know how to use our technology. We cross-train every single one of the technicians, even if it's one of the technicians from the general care side of our practice. But everybody knows how to do OCTs on scleral lens patients. Everybody knows how to do wavefront over refractions on scleral patients. It is an important thing in your practice to make sure everyone in the practice knows, all the technical staff know how to take these scans.
Right. And question here, this may actually be out of sort of your comfort zone, but I know we have folks from Visionics here. So question about pricing. If you're buying both instead of just one, right? So you're buying both units, the Solix and the VX130. Are there bundle deals? How does that actually work? So I don't know if the folks at Visionics are still here. Sierra, if you're still here.
Yeah, I can take that, Adam. So yeah, we do have bundled deals. So of course, when you buy an OCT and one of our screeners, or any two of our products across any product lines, we do bundle discounts. Right now we are running, like most people, some end of the year specials, and including some really good financing specials. So just, fill out the form on the visionics.com/US/ ODwire page, and we can connect you with your local rep, and they can kind of talk about pricing with you.
Very cool, and hard to believe, but we've actually killed an entire hour here. So, thank you, everyone. And Jeff, Muley, do you have any sort of parting words of advice for us?
Jeff, I'll let you take this one first, bud.
Thanks, Neil. I appreciate you doing that. I will tell you that being a practice that, again, came to both of these devices independently before they were part of the same company, I can tell you that whoever was kind of the architect of bringing these two companies together was a very smart person, because they really are two of the top devices in the industry. And, I know that because we've tested everything else. And these are the ones that we chose independently. I'm not saying that because I'm talking at this thing. I'm saying that because we arrived at that decision before I was even talking to this company as, somebody that speaks for them.
And Jeff, I would just say one more thing on that. We've had experience with all the predecessor technologies, the iView, the Avanti, and we thought those technologies were slick and sweet. And when you can improve on a technology that's really been the proven and the standard one in the space, it's unbelievable. And that's actually what they did with the multifunctionality on the Solix here. So again, I think that just for everybody listening, always consider the technologies and ask yourself, what is it measuring and how's it actually going to make what I'm doing and what I'm passionate about in my offices, how's it going to make me care for those patients better? And if the answer is yes, it will make me better and this is how it's going to do it, the technologies are at least worth looking at.
All right. Great. Well, on that note, thank you both for being here tonight. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, this webinar will be posted on ODwire in the next couple of days. There's going to be a discussion thread beneath the video. Feel free to come and ask questions. So again, thank you guys for being here tonight. And I guess I'll see everyone online.